Shalom. Welcome to Light to the Nations. We're studying about the Beit HaMoked, chamber of the hearth, chamber of the fire, inside the Holy Temple, large domed structure on the northern side, half of it facing the Azara, half of it actually sanctified in the holy territory, as it were, sacred territory of the temple, and half of it in the Chol, in the non-sacred area of the Holy Temple. Taking a little break here in the middle of Perek Hey, chapter 5 of Hilchot Beit HaBechira, Maimonides Laws of the Chosen House, having discussed Halacha 9 and 10 and 11, giving some background information about this immense structure, Beit HaMoked, that it itself contains 4 chambers and also facilitates a descent, entrance into a lower structure, the place of immersion, the mikveh of the Kohanim. Actually, there was a natural reservoir in the subterranean part of the Temple Mount that was utilized. The mikveh was built out of that reservoir, and part of this misibah, part of this descending, winding staircase that brought one to the immersion chamber, also that tunnel continued actually traversed the length of the Holy Temple underneath. Actually, as we have mentioned, as we have had occasion to mention in the past, there are many cisterns and pools of water, wells underneath the Temple Mount structure. This is very ancient. We had occasion once to mention a teaching in the Talmud regarding the relationship between this water structure underneath the Temple Mount and King David himself. It's all very ancient and, in fact, an important area of study, the exact nature, layout, topography, the mapping of the water system underneath the Temple Mount. So back to the Beit HaMoked, we have a tremendous amount of information that we'd like to look at. We mentioned that this chamber of the hearth has 2 gates, and since the Beit HaMoked itself is actually built half in Kodesh and half in Chol, half in the sacred area and half in the non-sacred, we find that the northern gate of this chamber is opened to the Chel, and that is considered to be Chol, the non-sacred, and the southern gate opens to the Azara, that is the Kodesh, the holy. Again, the quotation from Mesechet Midot, there are 2 gates to the Beit HaMoked, one open to the Chol, one open to the Azara. And now, here's something interesting. In the gate that opened from the Beit HaMoked into the Azara, there was, according to the Mishnah, a smaller gate, a wicket, a pishpesh. As we have learned in the past regarding the entrance to the Hechal, to the sanctuary, here too we have a door of the gate of the Beit HaMoked, and within this gate is a smaller gate, a smaller entrance, a wicket called a pishpesh, not to be confused with earlier teaching that we had on the Rambam about another wicket. What did this smaller entrance facilitate? Actually, a very interesting procedure that took place every morning in the Holy Temple at dawn, and it is actually a process referred to as bilush, which in modern Hebrew has a implication of investigation, like detective work, like checking something out. And what it was a certain patrol that took place every morning at dawn in the Holy Temple, where the Kohanim, the priests that were in the temple that were officiating, would begin the day by fanning out, actually in 2 columns, in 2 opposite directions, by going and just doing a kind of a search, kind of a checkup on all of the chambers and all of the gates in the Holy Temple to make sure that everything is in order, to make sure there had been no mishap or no intrusion during the night, that all of the sacred vessels were in their proper places, that everything was locked the way that it should be. And this pishpesh, the small entrance, the small wicket inside the gate, the larger gate of the Beit HaMoked, was actually the way in which they would enter into the Azara in order to facilitate this procedure. And here is actually the description based on the Mishnah in Masechet Tamid. You see, and this is something that we can illustrate here also, there was a very interesting type of policy regarding how this was done. There was a key, a large key that was within the purview of the Kohen who was responsible for the entire shift of Kohanim who were on duty at that time in the Holy Temple. So one of these men, one of the Kohanim, was actually the overseer of everything going on and everything that would fall out during the time of his shift. And that man, that Kohen, who was basically the one with the responsibility, was responsible for the key to the Azara, to the court of the temple. This key was actually kept in the Beit HaMoked, and it was kept in this fashion. As you see here, it was attached to a tile, and it was hidden underneath the floor of the Beit HaMoked. There was a tile which was lifted, and underneath this tile, the key was kept. According to tractates Tamid, this key was taken, and with its through this key, they began this process of investigation, because the key opened actually the smaller door, the wicket, the pishpesh, and from the Beit HaMoked, they entered by way of that small entrance into the Azara. And the description that we have, very picturesque, of this procedure, of this bilush, this dawn patrol, we like to call it, that took place every day in the temple. The Kohanim proceeded, and they had torches that illuminated their path, because this is still before sunrise in the temple, and they divided into two groups. And one of them went and proceeded easterly, and the other group proceeded westerly, and they would continue checking and investigating, making sure that everything was in its proper place, till they got to a particular location in the temple, which is called the place of the griddle cake makers. We'll learn more about what these griddle cakes were, the chavitin. And when they got there, they would exchange a greeting that everything is shalom, shalom, hakol shalom, everything is as it should be, everything is peace. And then they gave the instructions for the griddle cake makers to go and do their work. And actually in Masechet Midot we have the description that this particular chamber, the chamber of the griddle cake makers, was located on the east of the Azara, southwards, south of the Nicanor gate. So from this description, actually, we understand that the first task, actually, that the Kohanim were entrusted with early in the morning in order to begin their sacred duties in the temple courtyard, was to actually first check to see if everything is as it should be, where it should be, if there were no disturbances during the night. And this patrol broke off into two columns, and each one essentially traversed half a circle in opposite directions. Okay, one to the east and one to the west, and each group, it comes out, as they are traversing this path of half circle in opposite directions, each group along their way basically passed and checked three gates. The group which proceeded easterly checked the following gates, and I realize that we have not yet had occasion to mention these gates. We're going to be discussing these gates and their function in the future. They checked, the first group that was proceeding to the east checked the following gates in this order: the gate of the offering, Shar HaKorban, the gate of the spark, and of course Shar Nicanor itself. The second group, which proceeded in the westerly direction, checked in this order: the gate of fuel, the gate of the firstborn, and the gate of the water. And again, they met face to face in the middle of their path, which was by the chamber of the griddle cake makers, which again, according to our sages, is located between the Nicanor gate and the water gates. By the way, the gate that we've been discussing of Beit HaMoked, which essentially consists of two parts, collectively this gate is referred to in the writings of our sages as Shar Yechaniah, the gate of Yechaniah, which actually is a memorial to Yechaniah, the king who traditionally went out into exile from the Azara through this gate in the time of the destruction of the first temple, when a gate stood approximately in that location in the time of the first temple through Beit HaMoked. And this is, of course, in the time of the destruction that was wrought by Nebuchadnezzar. Now, as we have mentioned, of course, the Beit HaMoked has these four sub-chambers that we've been discussing. Now, in order for us to understand what's going on in the Beit HaMoked, how busy it is, the facilitation of the sleeping arrangements in the Beit HaMoked, because first and foremost, I think the first thing that we have to realize, most important function that the Beit HaMoked plays is in the dormitory facilities for each group of Kohanim that are serving there. And now we have mentioned this concept of the dawn patrol, a lot going on there, and an important meeting place and a landmark in every day of what's going on in the temple. So really, this is a place to pause before we continue understanding this more, in order to really get a grip on the scope of activity here. We have to understand how the Kohanim themselves that are serving in the temple are divided. We keep talking about shifts, and for a long time now, when we talk about the Kohanim that are serving in the temple, we talk about them, we use the expression mishmarot, which basically means watchings. This particular watch, this particular shift. And now we've mentioned the concept of the first responsibility every day, which is the dawn patrol. So how does this all work, especially considering that these men are all sharing the facilities of the Beit HaMoked while they are on duty? So what we know is that there are 24 groups, essentially, that are serving in the temple. The avodah, the sacred service of the Kohanim, is divided into 24 particular divisions, which are known in the terminology of our sages as mishmarot. A mishmar is a watch, and each particular watch has a Kohen who is designated as the overseer, or the authority over that particular watch. And this, the word is mimuna. This overseer, this authority, is referred to as the Rosh HaMishmar, the head of that particular watch. And again, this is very similar to a type of reserve duty. We're not dealing with everyone living in Jerusalem. The Jewish people are living all over their land. They may be involved in a totally different activity during the course of the year. They may not live in the proximity of Jerusalem at all. But the way that it was divided up was that this particular mishmar would collectively ascend to Jerusalem, just like the festival pilgrims of all of Israel would ascend to Jerusalem for 1 week. This particular mishmar, all of its members would ascend to Jerusalem. The period of responsibility of taking over the functions of the temple entrusted to this group being from Shabbat to Shabbat. So that is the schedule, the calendar of each mishmar, of each watch. It's their first day of duty is actually Shabbat, because the changing of the guard of each mishmar actually takes place on Shabbat, and it takes place, in fact, specifically after the offering of the musaf, of the additional offering, after the tamid. Of course, just as those who pray according to the Siddur of Israel, the prayer book, the Siddur, know that we have shacharit. During the week, we have the morning service, and on Shabbat, and on other days of extra holiness like the new moon and festivals, we have a service called musaf. Musaf, translated as the additional prayer service. Of course, the musaf service of our prayer comes from the musaf service in the Holy Temple. The idea that there is an extra additional offering on days of extra sanctity. So after the Musaf offering was brought in the Holy Temple on Shabbat, that is actually when the changing of the guards, the changing of the shifts, the mishmarot of the priesthood would take place. After Musaf, this is when they also brought the new batch of the showbread. And the showbread was replaced on Shabbat. It was placed on the golden table in the sanctuary. This is also when the two bezichim, the two censers of frankincense, were placed on the table at this time as well. And this actually takes place, this is done by the incoming shift of the Kohanim. So that actually, if you think about it, the very first job which is done on Shabbat by the new group of Kohanim who have now taken over the responsibility for all the jobs in the Holy Temple, the very first thing they do is attend to the showbread and the frankincense on the table. Now, the way that it would work would be that after all 24 shifts of the Kohanim would finish their tour of duty, in other words, each shift working for once every 24 weeks, then they would begin again from the beginning of the roster. Now, in the midst of years, as time progressed, there were more and more Kohanim, and the ranks of each mishmar swelled, and there were more and more Kohanim, and there were more men of priestly descent than there were really jobs in the temple, and then there were opportunities for them to participate and be part of a mishmar, and thus their chances for having a daily responsibility in the temple were diminished. And this was not good, because it reduced the possibility of each Kohen having the merits, having the ability, having the right to participate in the jobs of the Holy Temple, which of course was not fair. And therefore the decision was made to divide the mishmerot further, and to break down these divisions of the 24 watches into even smaller groups. And thus, not all of the members of each mishmeret would arrive at once in the temple, but rather they would serve in order. Each day a different group would come according to this order, and within the mishmeret these groups could settle that. That would be an internal matter as to how they would determine which group within the mishmeret would come first. And thus it was guaranteed that everyone would have ability to participate equally. And these groups, this new breakdown, the smaller numbers, these are what is referred to as Batei Av. And so the expressions that you've been hearing, this is the origin of these expressions whenever we talk about the priestly service in the temple. And again, all of this, very important to understand how these men functioned within the Beit HaMoked. So first we have the Mishmarot, the 24 watches, which became unwieldy in terms of, thank God, the growth in the population of the Kohanim, were then further divided into the Batei Av, Beit Av, the fathers' houses, so that within the structure of the divisions, they were further refined into family-based clans according to descent of the paternal side, and these Batei Av were rotating within the week of a particular mishmeret. The Batei Av served on a daily basis. And this is essentially the understanding of many of our authorities, that, for example, a mishmeret would be divided into 6 Batei Av, corresponding to the 6 days of the work week, whereas on Shabbat, all 6 Batei Av, all 6 subdivisions of the father's clans would serve together in the Beit HaMikdash, in the Holy Temple, and that, of course, because you'll ask, how do they all serve together? If the whole problem was that there were so many that they can't possibly do everything, that, every member of the group will not have a sacred task to perform, and of course then we'll have the problems of those that are being left out, the jealousy, etc. The way that this was accomplished, as in many other examples throughout the way that this was administered in the temple, there is a type of lottery which was conducted, and this is called pious. It's also, interestingly, in modern Hebrew, the word for the lottery, the state lottery, which we have booths out on the streets for the pious, the lottery. It turns out it's actually an ancient word, and it comes from this procedure in the Holy Temple, that the distribution of sacred tasks in the Holy Temple was determined by a certain type of lottery. How exactly that lottery was conducted is quite interesting, and we'll discuss it at one point. So on Shabbat, when all 6 Batei Av, all 6 family clans, were serving together, the distribution of the jobs was decided by lottery, and that lottery took place in the Beit HaMoked. So that is also an important fact. Now, we mentioned that in the Beit HaMoked, the Kohanim slept. And that was the purpose of the stone shelves, protrusions that we find around the walls of the Beit HaMoked. And one of the first questions that comes to mind especially when we look at the illustration, we try to understand exactly what our sages are teaching us. We might wonder, why were beds not brought into the Beit HaMoked? Why was it not more comfortable? Is there some sort of point in doing without comfort? Is there some minimalistic approach here? Actually, there is an idea that is stressed in many instances regarding the Holy Temple, that the Holy Temple is not a place for people to dwell in. It's not our house, it's Hashem's house. And thus, for example, with only one exception, there are no mezuzot in the Holy Temple. Because in the Holy Temple, it's not designed for our habitation, and the verse regarding the commandment to place mezuzot on the doorposts is that we should place them for a sign upon your gates and your doors, and this is not ours. So it was not considered to be an honor. It was not considered to be dignified or befitting the respect due the Beit HaMikdash to place beds for sleeping there in the Beit HaMoked for those that were sleeping there, and rather these stone shelves were placed there, something like shelves that wide shelves that were extending from the walls of the chamber itself, rows and rows of these shelves, so that as they would ascend in height, they were a bit narrower than the one below it, and this also accommodated sort of a climbing up like steps. And according to the description in the Mishnah, the elders of the Kahuna would sleep on these shelves. The younger Kohanim, who were considered to be a bit more sound physically, they actually placed mattresses on the floor, and that's where they slept. Both the younger and the older Kohanim, should be pointed out, all of this sleeping that's taking place in the Beit HaMoked takes place in the non-sanctified half of the Beit HaMoked, in the chulin, part of the chamber. Now, the elders of each particular clan, Beit Av of the Kohanim, are those that are responsible for the upkeep, for everything that takes place within the courtyard of the temple, and that is why all the keys to the courtyard were kept constantly under their surveillance and in their purview, and that is why the special arrangement that we described earlier, there was a hiding place within the Beit HaMoked, in the sleeping quarters of each shift, and the key to the gate, as we described, that facilitated the dawn patrol was located in a hollow place in the floor of the Beit HaMoked, covered over by a tablet. The tablet was lifted by means of a ring that was embedded in the tablet, and underneath the tablet in the hollow place, the key to the courtyard of the temple was attached on a chain, and this was solely the dominion, the responsibility of the Kohen, who was designated as the one who was responsible for everything that took place during his shift, and he alone is responsible for the administration of the temple during his administration, and that, of course, that responsibility is passed from shift to shift, from the outgoing to the incoming, all of this taking place in the Beit HaMoked. We're going to continue with our study about everything taking place in this chamber, within the Holy Temple, place of the Divine Presence, the light to Israel and the light to the nations.
Light to the Nations is produced by the Temple Institute, Jerusalem, Israel. Dedications are available for upcoming Light to the Nations teachings. To make a dedication, please visit templeinstitute.org, the multimedia section, Light to the Nations, or email us at temple@temple.org.il. Your dedications help to make these productions possible.